HO students and families, and welcome to another Wednesday night worship. I cannot wait to meet with you in person, but until then, thank God that we got the resources we have. And I just want to take a moment and just say thank you. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, for supporting us, for supporting our staff and what we're trying to accomplish. We just really need your prayers for wisdom and discernment in this time. But guys, thank you so much. You'll never know what it means to me as your youth pastor that you've supported, tuned in week after week to see what God has in store for us. And if you noticed that last week we started a series called Love and Hate. And we live in a world filled with love. We live in a world full of hate. And there's a fine line there. And last week we looked at that fine line and we looked at the sense that it's love. Love has to be the fine line between, obviously, love and hate. It has to be that fine line. Biblical, spiritual love has to be the fine line between that. This week, though, I want to ask you a question, a very simple question. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you knew you had to, in a sense, call out someone? You knew your friend was in trouble, or a friend was about to make a decision they weren't supposed to, wasn't right for them. Maybe they liked a certain person and they wanted to start a relationship with a person that was not biblically correct for them. And you knew in your heart of hearts that you had to confront them. No one likes confrontation, let's just be honest. No one, well, I wouldn't say no one, because some people love it. We'll get into that in just a second. But for the most part, confrontation's awkward for us. We don't really know how to do it. And I think there's many reasons for that. I think for the first part, maybe we don't want to break the friendship. Maybe we don't want to offend them. Maybe we even think we're not good enough spiritually to, in a sense, confront someone. And so it's hard for us and know how to do that and when. And so tonight, that's what we're going to look at. And what I've noticed is that there's two separate types of people in our world. We have those who, in a sense, really hate confrontation. It's awkward. You get nervous. You kind of tense up. Then you have the other ones who, in a sense, becomes this sort of judgmental kind of attitude where they feel like I can keep you accountable, I can keep you responsible, but yet when you try to do that to them, they don't like it. Do you get the idea? So tonight we're going to look at how do we handle confrontation biblically. How do I handle it in my own life? How do I handle it in other people's lives? What is the difference in that? And here's what I've noticed, and here's why I want to talk about this tonight. We hate in our generation today, we hate accountability and we hate responsibility. Because in reality, we hate ownership. We want to say we want to own something, we want to say that we want to be a part of something, but in reality, we hate accountability, we hate responsibility. So what I want you to do, grab your Bibles. We're going to be in Galatians chapter 6, in the first 5 verses there of Galatians chapter 6. And while you're flipping there, I want us to give you just a little bit of background and look how we got to Galatians chapter 6. Really short. Paul here is talking to a church of Galatia, and he has just wrapped up basically his part of the letter to this church on walking in the fruits of the Spirit. Getting rid of the things of the flesh and walking within the Spirit. And he lists out all the fruits of the Spirit. And then he ends chapter 5 in verse 26. I know probably some of you are still flipping there, but it says this in verse 26 of chapter 5. Let us not be desirous of vainglory, provoking one another, envying one another. And then he says in chapter 6 verse 1, Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, which are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if a man think himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceiveth himself. But let every man prove his own work, and then shall he have rejoicing in himself alone, and not in another. For every man shall bear his own burden. So tonight I want to give you two things that Paul gives to this church. I want to give you two things that Paul gave to the church of Galatia when it came to how do we handle confrontation. Well, one, instead of you hating accountability, become accountable. Instead of you hating accountability, become accountable. Verse 1 is going to tell us brethren. He's talking to, obviously, Christians here. He calls them brothers. If you go back through all of Paul's letters, anytime he mentions the word brethren, he's talking to his brothers in Christ. And here's what he says. If a man be overtaken in a fault. In other words, if a man, you notice he's about to do something wrong, or he's already done that thing that is wrong, those who are spiritual Restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. Bear ye one another in verse 2's burdens, and so fulfill the law. So here's what Paul is talking about here. He's saying, listen, instead of you hating accountability, become accountable yourself. Do you notice he only kind of gives us one little line on those who are overtaken in the fault. The rest of the letter, the rest of this little section is about the person that's got to confront him. Do you see that? He says, those who are spiritual restore the man. Those who are spiritual do this in a spirit of meekness. Those who are spiritual protect themselves because they also will be caught in the transgression if they're not careful. So here's what I kind of want to throw this out here to you. Become accountable in your own life. If you're going to confront someone and be someone's accountability partner, you yourself must be accountable. You yourself must hold yourself accountable. And you have to do this thing in the spirit of meekness. Now you may say, how do I do that? How do I know if I'm walking in the spirit of meekness? How do I know if I'm the spiritual one? How do I even know if I can become accountable? Well, it goes back to chapter 5 when he talks about the fruit of the Spirit. So you got to ask yourself the question, am I really walking in the fruit of the Spirit? Am I really doing what I'm supposed to do? Or am I being, in a sense, envious? Am I, in a sense, trying to get ahead of this person? Am I trying to find a fault in this person just to make myself look better? Or am I seriously doing this because I know within myself what I truly am? And that's what it means to be accountable. That's what it means to truly find yourself accountable, is that you become spiritual in the aspect of meekness. You become spiritual in the aspect that you want to do what is right because you realize what you are at the core root of yourself, is that you are indeed a sinful person and you are not above doing that which that other person just came in fault with. You're not above those things. And so become accountable. Become accountable. And he says in verse 2, bear ye one another's burdens. So here's the thing. If you're going to confront your brother or your sister, you're going to confront a friend, you're going to confront a neighbor, you're going to confront someone that you are really close to about a certain issue in their life, what you need to do is first become accountable. First become accountable. Understand, are you living in the spirit of meekness? Am I doing this for their best concern? And second, am I willing to stay there with them? Do you see what he says? He says, bear one another's burdens. So I want to give you an example of what he means here. Some of you don't know this, but I used to work out a lot. Now not so much. No comments, please. But now not so much. But I enjoy it. It's a good stress relief. I like going in there with my friends. And not too long ago, Coach Rob, a guy at Southern Alabama, asked me to go work out with him, and I did. Obviously, he's a lot stronger than I am, so he becomes my spotter. And I'm on this bench press, and I am just lifting this weight. Man, I'm going to town, and I hit like the brick wall, right, where I can't lift anymore. Literally, I got right there, and I was just like, nope, that's it. And I couldn't go any farther. Well, Coach Rob reaches down with his hands, and he says, I got you. And he picks the weight up with me and puts it back on the bar. In the same way, what you are saying to that person is, I'm not here to judge you that you couldn't get the weight lifted. I'm not here to hold you accountable in the sense to make myself look better and for you to look less. What I'm here to do is to lift that bar and say, man, I got you. I'm here with you. You don't have to carry this alone. You got people that are with you every step of the way. That's what it means to be accountable. That's what it means to be accountable in your own life, is that you want to hold that person accountable and you yourself be accountable to that person. Stick around. See it out. Because not only are we going to be accountable, we're going to be responsible. We are going to be responsible. Look down at verse 3. It says, for if a man think of himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let every man prove his own work, and then shall he have rejoicing in himself alone and not another, for every man shall bear his own burden. So Paul here is going to say, listen, you want to be accountable? You're going to bear that burden? You better be careful. Because what's going to happen to you if you're not careful, you're going to think of yourself to be something when in reality, we're nothing. Without Christ, we're nothings. Without Christ, we're lost, destined for an eternal hell. But with Christ, we're made something. So don't think of ourselves highly as we're better. Be responsible. Be responsible for your own soul. Be responsible for your own mind. Be responsible for your own heart. Be responsible for your own actions. And that's why he says in verse 4, he says, but let every man prove his own work. So if you want to be that guy that kind of, not in a sense calls people out, but you want to help someone, you want to, in a sense, carry a burden, you want to come alongside somebody and walk this path, this Christian life with one another, then you have got to be accountable and you have to be responsible. You have to look at your own life first. I keep saying that, but you have to look at your own life first. You have to be accountable and then responsible, because if you think of yourself highly, like you have arrived to the spiritual maturity and that you're better than that person, then you are destined for trouble. You are destined for trouble, because what he says there is that you are going to deceive yourself, then shall have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. In other words, then what you look for is you look for faults in someone. You look for the wrongs in someone all the time. You become that person that loves confrontation so much that you become judgmental. And what he's saying is, no. Be accountable. Be responsible. Be accountable in your own life. Yes, hold your brother accountable, but allow them to hold you accountable. Be responsible in your own life, but yet be responsible to your brother. Be responsible to one another. And he says this in verse 5. For every man shall bear his own burden. Now, here's the thing. We'll go back to the weightlifting kind of illustration. I had to first get the bar off. I had to get that weight bar off the actual bar to lift, right? So I got the weights off. I'm lifting. I hit about set 6 or 7 or rep 6 or 7, and I hit go for the 8th, and it was like, nope. But I had to carry that burden for a while, until I got to the end where I couldn't lift anymore. And he lifted, and then Coach Rob put it down and lifted it up with me. You have to carry first your own burden before you can carry someone else's. You have to understand, man, that without your understanding of who you are spiritually, you're in trouble. Now, here lies the question, and here's how I'm going to close tonight. What's the line? What's the balance between accountability and responsibility? Where do we draw the line between how do I hold myself accountable to someone else? How do I hold myself responsible to someone else? What is the line between the two that I can do this? If you go back up to, in a sense, verse 1 where he says, do this in the spirit of meekness. How? What is that fine line? And I think the fine line is this, it's love. You've got to allow love to be the filter between accountability and responsibility. Let me illustrate it with this. Pastor Jason and I, we drink coffee. Okay, and every morning we come in, we have our cups, and we coming in, and we're talking to one another, and it's always a cup of coffee. And he likes his a little different than I like mine, but in the same sense, we like coffee. He can tell you a little bit more about coffee than I can. I'm not in the sense know a lot about coffee. I just like a good cup of coffee. And the sweeter for me, the better. But you could talk to him about facts about coffee and all that, but in reality, it all goes back to the same principle. It's how it was brewed. Follow me. If you would go to any coffee shop, and some of your parents may have this, most of you have Keurigs now because you got the one little pot and there it is. But one cup, sorry, not pot, 1 cup of coffee and then you're done. But my parents growing up used to fix a pot of coffee. And my mom used to say, you want the 8-cup mark, the 8-cup mark. And here's how you figure it's the 8-cup mark. You put this many scoops of like your little grains in the filter. You put the filter at the top. You then put water that's equivalent to the 8 cups of coffee. And then it brews itself into the pot. You take the pot and then you have a nice fresh cup of coffee. But do you know how you know when the coffee maker is going bad? It's when you find grains within your coffee. See, what happens is when this grain kind of stirs and this hot water and the coffee grains stir up, in a sense, if it's boiled at the right temperature, you have a great cup of coffee. And here's my thing. It has to go through a filter before it got to the cup. And what I'm telling you is, in the same manner, in the same way, for you to find the line between accountability and responsibility, you have got to let love go through the filter. You've got to understand who you are. You have to understand at the root of who you are. And if you're listening tonight and you're not a believer in Jesus Christ, know this. You have a root issue of your heart. It's a problem, and that's called sin. At the very root of every being is sin. So if you think of yourself to be something when you are nothing, you forget the reality that we are all sinful, lost people, destined for an eternal hell without Jesus Christ. So here's my advice tonight. 2 things. If you're not a believer, here's what I simply need you to do. I need you to look inward. I need you to ask yourself this question. Instead of you judging the Christian, maybe you should ask yourself the question, am I living the exact same way? And what makes them act that way? And in reality, what makes them act that way is that they're sinful beings at the root of who we are, the same thing as you. And if you're here tonight and you are a believer in Jesus Christ, listen, don't judge your brother. Don't go around stirring up the gossip and stirring up the pot because you think you're better than them. Listen, we all have struggles and we all have faults. And when it comes down to it, it is our job as the body of Christ, known as the church, to come alongside one another and carry the burden with them. And we do this by allowing love to go through the filter, so we can do this in the spirit of meekness, in the spirit of love, and that we can allow to esteem others, as Philippians chapter 2 says, better than ourselves. So guys, I love you. And tonight, if you have a friend that's struggling, I pray that you uplift them. If you have a friend that's fallen into a sin, I pray that you carry that burden with them. Be accountable, be responsible, do it in the filter of love. I love you guys. Thank you so much for joining tonight. Hey, church family. One last thing before we close out tonight. Right where you are, if you will, just grab your family, kind of stop what you're doing, and just right where you are, just take a moment and just pray for Brian and Carly Herlocker, and for that, the whole entire Herlocker family. Right now, that's what they need. That's the most important thing, is they need our prayers. And so right where you are, please pray for them, and that'd be highly appreciated. Thank you guys so much for what you're doing. We love you.